On a freezing Christmas season in the late 1980s, in a quiet Montana town pressed against the edge of a national forest, I witnessed something that forever changed how I see the legend of Bigfoot. I was in charge of a small toy donation program for local children when one night I found the box disturbed, and in the beam of my flashlight stood a massive, dark-furred figure, not stealing, not destroying, but gently holding an old teddy bear as if it mattered more than anything else in the world. It didn't flee from my voice, only from the crackle of my radio. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a monster. It was a protector. Over the months that followed, missing teddy bears, paired footprints, one large, one small, and a quiet act of returning stolen toys revealed a truth far more human than frightening. That compassion can exist even in the deepest shadows of the forest, and that Bigfoot, like any parent, may simply be trying to keep a family safe. And now, dear viewers, before this story continues its journey, tell me, where are you watching from today? And what should I call you in the comments so I can greet you properly? How far do you think this story might travel? And who else might need to hear it? If this quiet tale from the woods touched you even a little, please gently tap like and consider subscribing. Not just to support the channel, but to help us build a warm, curious community of people who believe Bigfoot is more than a legend. From the heart of the forest to wherever you are in the world, thank you for being here, and my warmest greetings to each and every one of you. The wind had teeth that night, not the playful kind that nips and disappears, but the kind that stays with you, low, sharp, and slow, like it's remembering something. In Glacier Hollow, the last Friday of November meant the start of the town's annual winter donation drive. A folding table was set up under the flagpole outside the volunteer fire station, draped in red flannel and half damp from snowmelt. The metal donation box next to it stood tall and boxy like a forgotten mailbox, its lid half frozen in place, its hinges squeaking every time the wind rocked it. People came and went all week, dropping toys, mittens, canned soup, the occasional book, tokens of goodwill from a place too small to look away from need. Rowan Caldwell arrived late. His old Chevy truck crunched into the gravel lot just shy of midnight, headlights cutting through a soup of fog and sleet. He killed the engine, reached over to grab his flashlight, and paused, listening. Silence, except for the distant hum of a transformer and the soft clatter of the flag's halyard ropes tapping metal. He was used to nights like this. Quiet, still, slightly too cold for comfort, just cold enough to keep you honest. He stepped out, boots scraping over frost-rimed gravel, and locked the door out of habit. Not much to steal in an old fire station except old stories and older tools. The town didn't even pay him for night shifts. He did them because he couldn't sleep anyway. Not since Maeve moved in with her aunt. Not since the last holiday season turned into a list of things unsaid. He rounded the side of the station and aimed the flashlight toward the flagpole. That's when he noticed the box. It was off-center, angled sideways like something had pulled it. One of the donation flaps hung open, the metal handle crusted with ice. Several items were scattered across the ground. Tiny plastic dinosaurs, a paperback missing its cover, a knitted scarf that looked handmade. Rowan frowned. Vandalism? Kids screwing around? Seemed late for that. He clicked his radio on, just static. The line was always clearer during the day. He moved closer, breath ghosting in front of him, flashlight bouncing slightly with each step. Near the base of the flagpole, he crouched and touched the metal box, cold and damp. The snow beneath it had been disturbed, raked into messy arcs that didn't match boot prints. Something had dragged this. He looked to the ground. There, in the frost, a trail. Long, uneven, pulled through the gravel like a sack. He was about to straighten up when he heard it. Breathing, not loud, not ragged. Just steady, measured, almost calm. Coming from behind the donation box, a few feet away. deep enough that it didn't sound like a person, too composed to be a dog. He turned his head slightly, lowering the flashlight. His hand rested on his hip out of habit, not near a weapon, just where tension went to hide. He whispered, "Hello?" No reply, just breath. He stepped sideways, flashlight beam trailing along the edge of the box. A glimpse of movement, dark, hunched, not darting, but still, waiting. Then, fingers. They curled around the side of the box slowly. 5 of them. Long, human-shaped, but bigger. Too big. And in one of those hands, clutched tight, was a teddy bear. Faded brown fur, a torn ear flopping sideways, threadbare at the seams. But Rowan knew it. He froze. That stitch pattern. A jagged seam across the belly, crooked but firm. Done by a social worker in Missoula when he was 7, after the bear got torn in a group home fight over graham crackers. Rowan had that bear for years, until it got taken during a shuffle between homes. He hadn't seen it since 1989. His mouth went dry. The figure didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bolt. It raised the bear to its face, nosed it gently as if checking scent, and then pressed it tight to its chest. The gesture wasn't desperate. It was deliberate, careful, as if the object mattered more than the cold, the dark, or Rowan himself. He stepped back, not from fear exactly, but from something older. Memory, maybe, or the shock of something impossible acting, tender. Then the thing stood up. The shadow rose behind the box like smoke from a bonfire. Silent, controlled, taller than the pole marker beside it. The flashlight beam caught only fragments. A shoulder covered in thick black fur, the curve of a jaw too square for a bear, the gleam of an eye, orange-red in the light like coal reflecting flame. Rowan didn't breathe. The eyes didn't blink. They looked straight at him, not through him, not around him, at him, as if waiting to see what kind of man he'd be. His hand trembled slightly on the flashlight. Not from cold. He took another step back, slow. The figure didn't chase. It turned and walked into the woods. Rowan stood there for a long time, watching the dark where it had gone. He didn't follow, didn't call anyone, just stared at the scattered toys, the trail in the frost, and the bear that wasn't his anymore. Inside the fire station, he sat down in the chair by the window and turned off the light. He didn't sleep. He didn't try. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, something was breathing. Slow and steady, just like before. And somewhere, deep in the dark, something had decided to remember him. Rowan didn't sleep. Not really. He sat by the front window of the fire station, motionless, with the lights off, the cold seeping in under the door and licking at his boots. Somewhere out there, just beyond the bare-boned trees and the last flickers of the town's sodium lights, something had walked away into the dark carrying his childhood in its hands. He told himself it had to be a bear, a scavenger, a trick of fatigue, but no part of him believed it. Not really. The station clock ticked into 1:07 a.m. Rowan stood slowly, knees cracking, and reached for the analog radio clipped to his belt. He clicked the volume dial. A burst of static, then silence. The line crackled again. No voices, no dispatch chatter, just that eerie open-channel hiss that reminded him of breathing in a hallway too long after a hospital shift. He put it back on his hip and walked toward the door. The box was still out there. He stepped outside again, pulling his jacket tighter. The gravel had frosted over harder now. His boots snapped with each step, sharp and final, like breaking glass underfoot. The fog had thinned, but the air had that eerie way of carrying sound too far and making everything else feel too close. He walked slowly toward the donation box, flashlight in hand. The same flaps still hung crooked. The same toys still lay scattered. But the trail was fresher now. The marks in the frost. They were deeper. Wider. Still no prints, not exactly. More like impressions, drag lines. Something massive had passed here, but light on its feet, or careful. He was about to bend down again when a soft shift of gravel behind him made him freeze. That breath. Closer now. He turned, the flashlight beam cutting a hard arc across the lot. His hand was steady, but his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The beam landed on a figure halfway between him and the trees. Still, upright, no motion, just watching. Its shoulders moved slowly with breath. Its eyes caught the light. They didn't flare or shrink back. They accepted it. Not passive, curious. Rowan didn't speak this time. There was a pressure in the air now, like when lightning was building in the clouds overhead, but hadn't struck yet. He kept the flashlight trained center mass, instinctively. Then, without sound, the thing turned slightly, its head tilting toward the fire station. The radio on his belt popped, just a tiny crackle of static, but sudden and loud in the silence. And Rowan saw it, the head of the figure twitch, not from fear, but awareness. It heard it, recognized it, turned toward it. The breath caught in Rowan's throat. It didn't react to his voice, but it reacted to the radio. That radio was analog. Old. No GPS, no voice command, just frequency. The figure tilted its head further, one side then the other, like it was calculating something in the air. Rowan took a step back. It didn't follow. Instead, it walked forward, but not toward Rowan. It moved sideways, slow and deliberate, until it stood between him and the donation box. And then it stopped. It was positioning itself, blocking the box from Rowan. Not threatening, not posturing, just choosing a side. Rowan lowered the flashlight slightly. Not out of peace, but because something about this wasn't survival instinct. This was decision. It was thinking. The beam caught something on the ground again, a card, flipped face down in the gravel. He reached down, glancing toward the figure as he did. No movement, just watching. He picked up the card. It was a child's thank you note, written in big, uneven Sharpie strokes on red paper. Merry Christmas to whoever needs this. Love, Elena. There were glitter stars glued along the corners, half of them already gone. Rowan turned the card slowly in his hand, fingers tracing the sloppy glued edge. The figure shifted. Rowan looked up. Its head was angled, not at him now, but at the card. Still not moving, but focused. Intently. Like it knew it meant something. Not words, but weight. He felt it before he realized what it was. His foot had inched forward, almost imperceptibly, a half step closer. The figure responded instantly. A low sound, somewhere between a snort and a sigh, vibrated in the cold air. Not loud, but grounded. A warning, not from panic, but precision. Rowan stilled. The sound had shape to it, not guttural, not beastly. More like someone clearing their throat behind a closed door. The message was clear. Stop. And for the first time, Rowan wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid of crossing an invisible line. He stepped back. The figure exhaled again, slower this time, and turned its gaze toward the woods. Then, without haste, it began to walk. It didn't look back. Rowan turned and walked fast, deliberately. Not running, not fumbling, but moving with the kind of tension that only comes when you know something has spared you. He reached the fire station door, yanked it open, stepped inside, and shut it hard behind him. The lock clicked. Then the deadbolt. His hands were shaking now. He pulled the shades over the windows, turned the dial down on the radio until it was barely a whisper, and backed away from the glass. He didn't sit. Couldn't. Just stood, staring at the steel door like it might inhale. And then it came. Not a knock, not a pound, just footsteps. Slow, methodical, heavy. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. Crossing the gravel again. He knew it was at the door before he heard it breathe. A long exhale muffled through the steel. Then, nothing. Rowan waited. 1 breath, 2, 10. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves. The metal flagpole sang low with the pull of the breeze. But there was no more movement, no more breath. He clicked the safety on his flashlight off and pressed his ear to the door. Silence. The kind that sinks into your skin and stays there. He waited 10 more minutes before he moved away. Somewhere deep in the woods, something was making its own choices. Calculated, careful, patient. Rowan sat again, this time with the card in his hands. He turned it over and over until the glitter rubbed off onto his palms. And still, that sound from earlier, like someone clearing their throat in warning, echoed in the back of his mind. He realized then, whatever this thing was, it didn't run. It didn't fear him, and that terrified him more than anything else had in years. Rowan didn't reach for the gun first. That came later. He reached for the door latch, slid it closed tight, then turned the deadbolt slow and firm, the click louder than it should have been in the hush of the room. His breathing came too fast. He stood there, hand on the bolt, eyes locked on the thin window above the knob. Just glass. No curtain. No barrier. Outside, it was all fog and faint orange spill from the streetlight. Inside, every nerve in him throbbed like he'd been plugged into something electric. He stepped back from the door. 3 feet. 5. Turned off the flashlight but didn't let go of it. His other hand hovered near the old .45 in the cabinet, not touching it yet. Not yet. Still trying to understand. Whatever that thing was, it had stopped. Somewhere just outside. Rowan stood in the darkness of the fire station office, shoulders hunched. The room smelled of dry paper and engine grease. One dim light buzzed faint behind the vending machine. The radio crackled a little on the desk. Then, the thinnest tap of sound against the outer metal. A breath, slow and pressed through thick lungs. He crept forward, one careful step at a time, until he was near enough to peer out through the tiny glass square. He didn't flick on the porch light, just leaned in, eyes adjusting. The shape moved. First, just a shadow among other shadows, then more defined. It was close. Too close. Down low. Crouched, maybe. He couldn't see the face, not clearly, but it was there. The bulk of it. The mass. The heat of presence pushing against the cold glass between them. Then, motion. The head lifted. 2 eyes stared in. And then it moved sideways. Slowly. Across the window frame, pausing at the sliver of light that leaked through the edge of the blind. Rowan flinched. It didn't flinch back. It stopped where the light hit hardest and reached up one massive hand, flat-palmed, and blocked it. Not aggressively. Just a firm, deliberate gesture. Like someone pulling a curtain. The message clear. Stop watching. His pulse rattled in his throat. It wasn't rage. It wasn't chaos. It was control. Then the light dimmed again as the figure shifted back, out of the direct beam. Rowan backed away once more. He reached the desk, flicked the radio down low. Static. He pressed the button, tried to keep his voice level. Station 3 to dispatch. Got something outside. Not sure what. Send Boone if he's on call. Quiet arrival. No sirens. No response. The channel blinked. Empty. He sat on the edge of the desk, never turning his back to the door. The silence deepened. The air felt heavy, like snow was about to fall. Then a sound. A different sound. Metal against gravel. Rowan stood again, inching toward the door. There, through the window, the shape returned. It didn't come forward. It crouched, moved slow, deliberate, and in the beam of his breath-fogged view, it did something so precise, so careful, that it took Rowan a second to understand what he was seeing. It placed the teddy bear down. Not tossed, not dropped, placed, right on the concrete, dead center of the fire station threshold. The same bear, his bear, the one that vanished. It rested there now, small and worn and oddly sacred against the frost-bitten porch. Then the shape rose to full height again and just stood there, not asking to come in, not forcing a confrontation, just declaring something in silence. Rowan's heart hammered. This wasn't an offering. This wasn't a gift. It was a message. I'm taking this back. Don't follow. He stepped closer to the window, watching, and as if hearing his breath, the figure turned its head slightly, acknowledging him, but not engaging. Rowan swallowed hard. This wasn't madness. It wasn't instinct. It was communication. The eyes, the breath, the measured pause. They all spoke the same thing. Boundaries. Then, without sound, the figure stepped sideways and disappeared past the window frame. The wind picked up. The flag rattled high above. Loose gravel danced along the concrete. Rowan stayed frozen, one hand against the cold metal of the door. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. No sound, no breath. Nothing moved. He exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours, then stepped to the radio again. Station 3 to dispatch. Update. Subject gone. No threat. Deputy Boone still requested. Quiet arrival. He didn't expect a reply, but the voice crackled in moments later. Boone's. Copy en route. 10 out. Short. Unbothered. Boone never sounded rattled. Rowan sat back down, this time slowly. The bear still sat outside, alone. He didn't open the door again that night. Didn't sleep either. He waited. Because something had changed. It hadn't tried to break in. Hadn't run when caught. It had looked him in the eye. Placed something precious down like a warning or a truth, and left the rest to him. Outside, the fog began to burn off. Somewhere far in the woods, a branch cracked. Not sudden, not close, but loud enough to say, "This line stays where you found it." And Rowan finally understood something his bones had already guessed. Some doors aren't meant to keep things out. They're meant to hold the silence in. Boone showed up just after 4 a.m., driving a county SUV with the lights off and the engine so quiet, Rowan didn't hear it until it crunched over gravel. The deputy stepped out wearing the same beat-up brown jacket he wore every winter, the elbows duct-taped, the collar turned up against the cold. He didn't wave, didn't ask questions right away, just stood there for a second, scanning the lot, the frost, the box under the flagpole still slightly ajar. Rowan met him halfway. Neither of them said much at first. Just the way older men don't, when the air between them already carries more than language can hold. Boone nodded toward the scattered toys. "That how you found it?" "Worse," Rowan answered. "It was moved, dragged a few feet. Some stuff was gone. Bear showed up again later." Boone squatted down by the box, ran a gloved hand over the rim. The lid's edge had thin scratches, not claw marks, but more like from rocks or dirt. His flashlight flicked across the gravel. The beam moved slow, searching, then he stood up and turned toward the trees. "What time?" "Between midnight and 2. I was inside when it got close. It didn't try the door, just waited." "Waited," Boone echoed. Not like he was surprised, more like he recognized the word from another time. They walked in silence to the edge of the lot. Rowan's footprints were still visible, but something else caught Boone's eye, and he crouched again. Right near the edge of the tree line, in the softest frost, was a shape too wide to be a boot, too long to be a paw. No distinct toes, just pressure, weight, spread. He brushed the frost lightly. It didn't melt under his glove. He followed the line where it doubled back, farther into the trees, then stopped again. His flashlight hovered on a pane of glass, one of the fire station windows, low and narrow. On the outer corner, faint as a whisper, a smudge. 5 parallel streaks, long, with calloused texture pressed into the fog. A handprint, not a child's, not human. Boone didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Rowan stepped closer. "You've seen something like this before," he said, voice steady, not accusing. Boone straightened, looked him dead in the eye. "Week ago," he said slowly. "Up by the West Range. Hunting camp called in a noise complaint. Said their trail cameras caught something near their cooler. I got there next morning. Cooler was busted but not ripped, like it had been opened, like with hands." Boone didn't nod, didn't flinch. "I didn't log it. Didn't want the out-of-towners making noise, but they swore they saw movement all night. I figured, bear maybe." "You're telling me different." Rowan glanced toward the station, jaw tight. "I'm not telling you anything. I just need you to believe I didn't imagine it." Boone blew out a breath, mist curling in the air. "I believe you." Then he turned, squatted again near the edge of the lot, and aimed his flashlight lower. There, half buried in pine needles, was something unexpected. A crumpled foil wrapper. Not trash. It was an MRE sleeve. Military ration, half burned at the edges. Beside it, an old cigarette butt, paper yellowed and crushed. Boone picked it up with the tip of a pen from his pocket, holding it up in the light. "Not yours," he said flat. "No." Boone turned toward the slope leading down toward the back trail. "There's people out here who shouldn't be." Rowan's stomach dropped slightly. So it wasn't the big one stealing from the box. Boone didn't answer. He scanned the tree line again. Slower this time. Less like a cop and more like a man watching the dark for something that used to have a name and doesn't anymore. They weren't just stealing. They were watching. Rowan followed his gaze. And something else was watching them. Boone nodded once. "You ever think maybe we're not the only ones who want to keep this place quiet?" Rowan didn't reply. The two of them stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing stirred. But the absence of sound had shape now. It felt observed. Boone walked back toward the box, bent down, and lifted one of the smaller toys, a red plastic truck. The back axle was cracked. He set it aside gently. "Leave the box out tonight?" Rowan thought for a moment. "No, not anymore. I'll pull it in at dusk from now on." "Good." Boone stood again, dusted off his gloves. "I'm not writing this up. Not yet." Rowan nodded. "I figured." Boone walked halfway to the SUV, then stopped. "If anyone asks," he said without turning, "you heard a raccoon. Loud one, that's all." "Understood." He climbed in, started the engine, and drove off without lights. The gravel settled. Rowan was alone again. He stood in the middle of the lot for a long time, his breath catching faint gold in the glow of the fire station's porch light. Then he walked back to the window, looked out across the trees. The frost still held in the shadows. The silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. Not anymore. It felt maintained, like something had drawn a line, and everyone knew it was there. Spring arrived late in Glacier Hollow that year. The snow didn't melt so much as disappear, receding in patches like an animal too tired to fight anymore. Gravel roads turned soft with thaw. Trees began their slow green whisper, and the air smelled like wet pine and forgotten promises. But Rowan Caldwell still pulled the box inside at dusk, every night, without fail. By then, folks in town had started to talk. Nothing direct, nothing with teeth, just the way small towns always do when silence gets heavy. Someone said the donation count was off. Someone else claimed kids had been poking around the lot after dark. Nobody said anything to Rowan's face. They never did. But he heard the pauses, the way sentences leaned and never stood up straight again. Maeve showed up on a Thursday afternoon. She slipped into the fire station like she always had. Quiet, without warning, carrying a small canvas tote, and that look in her eyes that said she'd already seen more than anyone was ready to explain. 11 going on something older. Rowan was oiling a chainsaw on the workbench. "You're not supposed to be here," he said without looking up. "I'm not supposed to be a lot of places," Maeve replied. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired in that way kids get when they've learned not to expect yes. He wiped his hands and turned around. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor by the gear locker, flipping through a comic book that looked like it had been folded in half more than once. Her hair was tucked behind her ears. Her sleeves were too short. "You hungry?" "Nope." "You come to lecture me again?" Maeve looked up. "People are saying you took the bear." Rowan paused. "People say a lot of things." "They're saying it was the one I put in the box," she added, more careful this time. "The old one with the music box inside. The button eye." Rowan sat on the stool, elbows on knees. "It's gone? They said it never made it to the church inventory." He didn't answer. Maeve studied him, eyes narrowing just a little. "I didn't tell them anything. I just thought, maybe if I asked you straight, you wouldn't lie." That landed harder than she intended. Rowan looked away, jaw tight. He didn't say no, and that was enough. Maeve stood up, brushing dust off her jeans. "Some people think I took it," she said, voice low. Because of my dad. Because I'm who I am. Rowan's stomach sank. That's not fair. It's not new either. He watched her walk to the door. Pause. Hand on the frame. They think if something disappears, it must be us. Rowan stood. You didn't take it. I know, she said. Then she left. That night, Rowan sat alone longer than usual. The bear hadn't come back. The big shape hadn't returned. But the trees still pressed close, and the quiet still had edges. The next morning, Maeve didn't show up at school. By noon, her aunt called the station. By 3, Rowan was out on foot, moving fast through the tree line west of the fire station, boots slipping in thawed mud, flashlight in hand even though the sun hadn't dipped yet. He found the trail by instinct. Something about the spacing, the rhythm of the branches disturbed, like a kid had pushed through where the deer wouldn't go. And then he saw it. A teddy bear. Not the one from before. Newer, cheaper. Still had the price tag from the church fundraiser. It sat at the base of a stump like a candle in a vigil. He called her name. No answer. Again. Still nothing. Then, far off, low, almost shamefully soft, a sound. It wasn't a cry. Not quite. More like a sharp inhale that caught and stayed there. He turned toward it, moved fast. Not running, not shouting, just moving with that weight in his chest that knew what it meant to be too late. But this time he wasn't. He found her sitting beneath a hemlock, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide and dry. She didn't look up right away. He crouched. You okay? She nodded. What happened? Maeve didn't answer. She just pointed, eyes locked on something behind the trees. Rowan turned. There were prints, 2 sets, one large, one smaller, both heading into the woods, side by side. He stepped forward, studying them. Not human, but not animal. And in the center of the trail, a single pine cone, cracked open and hollowed, resting on top of a patch of moss like it had been placed there. Maeve finally spoke. I gave them the wrong one. What? The bear. It wasn't the one from before. It was just a different one. I thought maybe it'd be okay. Maybe they'd still know. Rowan's throat went dry. They came anyway? She nodded. There was a sound. Then I saw the tall one, and another, smaller. It didn't come close, just stood behind. Rowan didn't ask if she was scared. He didn't need to. Her fingers were still shaking. They didn't try to hurt you? No. He looked back at the trail, then at her. You can't do this again. You hear me? You can't come out here alone. I wanted to make it right. It's not yours to fix. She didn't argue. He put a hand on her shoulder. We go home, now. She nodded. As they walked back through the thinning light, Rowan didn't look behind them, but he felt it. That presence. Watching again. Not angry, just expectant. That night, the new bear was gone. No mess, no noise, just gone. And Rowan understood something deeper than fear. The child knew. The line between their world and something older, wilder. It wasn't guarded by grown men with radios. It was kept by belief. And now, Maeve had crossed it. By mid-July, the air in Glacier Hollow had turned to ash and grit. Not from fires close by, at least not yet, but from something carried on the wind. A distant burn, dry brush kind of smoke, not thick enough to darken the sky, but enough to settle into your lungs, make your water taste like memory. The kind of summer where the heat doesn't break at night, just hangs above the trees like it's waiting to see who'll move first. Rowan didn't sleep much during fire season, not because of calls, there weren't many, but because of the way silence turned mean in the heat. It felt like something pressing against the windows, tapping on the metal siding of the station, just to see if you'd flinch. That morning started like any other. A dry wind through the pine, a report of smoke west of Black Hollow Ridge. Volunteers were called in, and Rowan signed his name without being asked. He didn't like the ridge. Too exposed. The land was all shale and silence, and the trees had grown thin from years of quiet drought. By noon, they were climbing up in pairs, packs slung high, boots cracking through the sunburned needles. The smoke wasn't heavy, just a thin coil rising from somewhere past the switchback, like the mountain was exhaling slowly, trying not to bother anyone. Rowan was near the back, watching for slippage in the crew. He didn't talk much, never had, but the others followed his pace, trusted the way he moved, the way he knew how to listen to the land like it was an old friend who only spoke in warnings. That's when he saw it. Off trail, up high, maybe 60 yards out behind a break in the tree line, a shape. Still, watching, he stopped walking. Didn't say a word. Didn't raise his hand or call for backup. He just stepped off the path, boots finding each rock like muscle memory. The others didn't notice. He moved with the kind of stillness that makes you invisible if you want it enough. The trees closed in again, and the heat pressed heavier. Then he reached the ridge, and there it was, standing on a ledge above the drop, black fur soaked with sweat and dust, shoulders broad, head slightly bowed. Not running, not afraid, just waiting. The teddy bear was in its hands again, the same one, torn, faded, familiar. Rowan didn't raise his flashlight. He didn't move closer. He just watched. The figure didn't look at him. Its attention was somewhere else. Down, toward the base of the ravine, toward something Rowan couldn't see. He shifted, tried to follow the line of sight. Then he heard it. Soft, rhythmic. A sound that stopped his heart more than anything else could have. Crying. Not human, not loud, but unmistakable. He moved slow now, every step precise, careful. Down a narrow slope, hands brushing bark and rock, breath shallow. And then, there, just past a tangle of brush, hidden where the trail couldn't see, was a dip in the earth. A kind of natural pocket, hollowed by water years ago. Inside it, crouched low and shivering, was something small, covered in dark fur. Its head was tucked into its arms. Its back rose and fell with each shaky breath. The sound came from it. Quiet, like it knew it wasn't supposed to make noise but couldn't help it. The mother, or whatever the watcher was, didn't move, didn't come down. It stayed on that ledge like a sentry, holding the bear, watching the trail, watching for whatever else might come. Rowan didn't get closer. He didn't take a photo, didn't whisper or even blink too fast. He just looked, and suddenly every piece of it fell into place. The bear wasn't for comfort. It was for silence. A tool, a lesson. He remembered the night it clutched that bear close, like it was checking scent, making sure it was the right one. He remembered the way it placed it down, not like a toy, but like a trade. It wasn't sentiment. It was strategy. Keep the small one quiet, because noise calls danger. Crying calls them in. Rowan stepped back, heart tight in his chest. He looked again toward the mother, still standing on the ledge, unmoving. Its eyes found his now, finally, not with anger, not even fear, but calculation. And beneath that, something quieter. Trust? No, not quite. Recognition. He nodded once. That's all. Then he turned, walked back the way he came, slower this time, letting the sweat drip down his back, letting the moment settle into his bones like heat into stone. Back on the trail, the crew hadn't noticed he was gone. They were still brushing down embers, watching the ridge. Later that night, when the reports were done and the maps rolled up, Rowan sat alone on the front step of the fire station. The air had cooled a little. The wind still carried ash, but softer now. He thought of Maeve, of the bear, of the way she said, "They didn't try to hurt me." And he thought of how close they all were to missing the truth. This wasn't about curiosity, wasn't about superstition or local lore. It was about protection, about what any mother, any father, would do to keep their young safe when the world didn't know how to listen. He didn't tell Boone, didn't write it down, didn't even mark it in his own mind like a story, just held it there, quietly, because some things are too sacred for words. And because the next time someone hears a baby crying in the woods and says it's just a bobcat, just the wind, just their mind playing tricks, Rowan will know better. The day before Christmas Eve fell flat and gray, the kind of sky that holds back snow just long enough to make you uneasy. The wind was slow and cold, threading through town like a warning you couldn't quite place. Most people were inside by early evening, sipping from mugs, their radios tuned to holiday songs that no one truly listened to anymore. Lights twinkled along porch rails and gutter lines, glowing warm against the chill. But Rowan didn't look at them. He was at the station late again. He told himself he was catching up on inventory. The truth was quieter than that. He couldn't go home. The station smelled like dust and motor oil and the coffee from 3 hours ago. It was familiar, boring in a way that made him feel solid. He was reviewing log entries at the desk, pencil tapping lightly against the wood, when something shifted in the air. Not a sound, but a pressure, like someone pulling a string behind the scenes. He stopped writing. Then it came, a single knock. Low, deep, too strong for a branch, too slow for wind. It wasn't a pounding. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. Rowan froze. The pencil rolled off the table and hit the floor. He stood. The knock hadn't come from the side door where deliveries arrived, or the window where the motion light sometimes flickered. It had come from the front, from the main door, steel reinforced, always locked from the inside. No window, no peephole. Just solid weight between him and whatever waited beyond. He walked to it slowly, not like someone expecting trouble, but like someone who already knew it had arrived. His hand hovered near the .45. He didn't draw it. Didn't need to. The gesture alone steadied him. He stood still, listening. Nothing. Not breath, not footfall. Only the faint hum of the fluorescent bulb overhead, and the soft, steady hiss of wind against the walls. He undid the deadbolt and opened the door. Empty porch, empty lot. But there, on the frozen ground, directly in front of the door, something small and square-shaped rested in the frost. A bag, plastic, tied at the top, half transparent under the porch light. He stepped forward, crouched beside it. Inside were toys. Not new ones, not wrapped, not arranged like a gift, just toys, worn, familiar. Rowan pulled the bag open and reached in. Hot Wheels, a jump rope, a dented metal lunchbox with faded Looney Tunes characters on it, a half-complete Scrabble set, and at the bottom, a folded note in crayon, red and green stripes along the border, a child's name in shaky print. Tyler, age 6. He remembered that name. It was one of the donation tags from last month. The box had been short. People had whispered, blamed the system, blamed the families, maybe even blamed him. But now the missing was returned. Every toy once lost had found its way home. He stood slowly, eyes scanning the tree line. The air was still, until it wasn't. Movement, far, almost out of range. A dark figure at the edge of the woods, just standing. Tall and broad, shadow bleeding into tree trunks, as if it had always been there and had simply decided to let itself be seen. Rowan didn't step closer. He didn't need to. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't roar. It didn't want attention. It wanted acknowledgement. And Rowan gave it, with the smallest nod. The figure remained a moment longer. Then it turned and disappeared into the dark. Not rushed, not hunted. Like someone who had finished something and no longer needed to stay. He stayed out on the porch for a long time. The air pressed cold against his skin, but he didn't move. His breath clouded and vanished. His thoughts settled around one simple truth. It hadn't been the watcher taking from the box. It had been someone else. And now that someone had been dealt with. Rowan didn't know how. He didn't want to know. But something had shifted, not in fear, in order. He brought the bag inside, set it gently on the desk, and pulled the tag with Tyler's name from the old box of extras. He stapled it to the handle and wrote a date. December 23rd. It would go out with the rest of the packages tomorrow. Maeve stopped by just before closing. She didn't speak at first, just saw the bag, read the tag, and looked up at him with eyes that didn't need explanation. "You found them?" she asked. Rowan shook his head. "They were returned." "By who?" He didn't answer, but she knew. She looked toward the front door, then back to the bag. "He fixed it." Rowan nodded slowly. "No, he corrected it." Maeve stood silent for a long time. Then she opened the zipper of her backpack and pulled out a bear. Another one, old, missing one leg, the stitching uneven. "I brought this one today," she said. "It's not for the list, just for the box." He took it from her hands carefully. "You want me to log it?" "No." He placed it gently on the counter. They didn't talk much after that. She left before sunset. Rowan stood at the window as the sky dimmed into that hollow winter blue, the kind that feels older than the land itself. He looked out across the gravel lot, past the bare pole where the flag only rose on holidays, and into the woods beyond. He knew what kind of knock that had been. Not a question, not a plea, a declaration. We see what's broken, and we don't allow it to stay that way. And now others knew the station was not alone. Something watched here, something protected, and the weight of that wasn't frightening. It was earned. The next year came quiet. There was no warning when the winter folded back into itself and spring crept in through the pine. The trees didn't bloom so much as exhale, and the gravel roads dried slow under April's reluctant sun. By summer, the air in Glacier Hollow had softened again. The smoke didn't come. The nights cooled just enough to make the stars feel close, and by the time fall arrived, most people in town had already moved on from whatever whispers had passed between them the year before. That's how towns like this work. Things happen, but they're rarely spoken plainly. But some people remember differently. Rowan still pulled the box inside at dusk, not because he was afraid anymore, but because it felt right. No one questioned it. The donation drive still ran, like it always had. Signs still went up on the diner windows. Kids still wrote tags in crayon. People brought bags of sweaters, stuffed animals, puzzles with pieces taped into baggies. The town leaned into the tradition with a kind of muscle memory. The good kind. The kind you don't think about while it's happening. But something had changed. The box didn't lose things anymore. Not really. Some items went missing from time to time, yes. But never the new flashy ones, never the shiny or expensive. Just the soft things, the old bears, the threadbare ones, the ones someone had clearly loved already, the ones that came with invisible weight sewn into their seams. Rowan kept track of it, quietly, not in reports, just in his head. He never told Boone, didn't need to. Some things didn't need paperwork. He watched Maeve grow taller that year. She started to wear her hair differently, carried books with spines too thick for middle school. She stopped asking the kind of questions that had answers and started asking the kind that didn't. She never brought up the woods, never brought up the knock. But every December, she dropped off a teddy bear. Just one, old, usually patched. Some of them looked like they'd come from the back of closets or from the bottom of forgotten bins in the church basement. One had a burnt paw. One had no eyes. All of them were stitched carefully somewhere, along the belly, the neck, the side seam under the arm. Stitches done by hand, sometimes neat, sometimes crooked, never careless. She never explained where they came from. She just walked in, set it on the counter, and left. Rowan didn't ask. He kept one of them. Not the nicest, not the cleanest, but the one that reminded him most of the bear from all those months ago. The one he hadn't seen again since that night under the frost. The one that watched the trail while the child below cried without sound. He didn't display it, didn't set it on a shelf or frame it behind glass. He kept it in the bottom drawer of his desk, wrapped in a scarf. Just a reminder, not of what he'd seen, but of what he'd chosen not to speak. Then, one late afternoon just after the first light snowfall dusted the gravel, Rowan was locking up the station when he caught movement in the far edge of the tree line. It wasn't fast, wasn't loud, just present. He squinted into the gray, breath rising slow from his nose. At first he saw nothing but trees. Then a shadow shifted near the base of the old fence line. Two figures, not close, not approaching. One small, one tall. The taller figure stood upright, still massive in frame, even at that distance. The shorter one stood beside it, not behind, not clinging, just there, not clutching anything, no teddy bear, no offering, just itself. It didn't wave, didn't flinch. It turned slightly, like it was about to walk deeper into the trees, then paused. The smaller one looked back. Even from that distance, Rowan saw it. Not the details, but the absence. It wasn't holding anything. Not anymore. He stood still, boots crunching frost. The wind moved through the pine like a breath held and finally let go. And then the figures were gone, into the dark. Rowan didn't follow, didn't step off the porch. He just stood there and understood. The bear wasn't needed anymore. The child didn't cry in the woods now. The gift had done what it came to do. It had stayed long enough. He turned back toward the station, hand resting on the cold steel of the door handle. Inside, the radio murmured faint static. Outside, the wind brushed the flagpole in a rhythm he couldn't place. Not quite music, not quite message, just presence. And that was enough. Some stories never make the papers. Some stories don't need a name. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the sky forgets to move, you remember them anyway. Not because they scared you, but because they didn't. Because they asked for nothing. Because they left something behind. And Rowan knew, the way some men know the shape of fire before it catches, that kindness doesn't always look like light. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a stitch in a bear's belly. Sometimes it looks like something walking away from your porch, not because it's afraid of you, but because it no longer needs to stay. And he also knew, some gifts are never meant to be opened. They're meant to be carried, quietly, forward. Sometimes, it's not the loudest moments that stay with us, but the quiet ones. A small gesture left at a doorstep. A breath held just beyond the edge of light. A kindness offered with no name attached. In a world that rushes to explain, to label, to prove, some truths are better left unspoken. Some boundaries are sacred because they're felt, not drawn. And some stories carry more meaning when they end with silence, not answers. There are things that live just beyond the reach of headlights and reason. But they aren't always waiting to frighten us. Sometimes they're simply watching. Sometimes they're guarding. And if we choose to look past fear, past what we expect and what we think we know, we might glimpse something greater. The possibility that we are not alone, and never really were. What we give, even in the smallest form, be it a bear with one eye, a promise kept, or a silence honored, can travel farther than we imagine. Not every gift needs to be acknowledged. Not every kindness comes with a thank you. But they matter. They echo. They root themselves quietly into the world and grow in ways we may never fully see. So wherever you are, whoever you are, may this story linger like a warm breath on a cold window. May it remind you that there's power in patience, strength in gentleness, and beauty in what doesn't demand to be known. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear what stayed with you most. Please feel welcome to share your thoughts in the comments below. What you felt, what you believe, or simply where you're listening from. And if this tale made you pause, even for a moment, consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss what comes next. Every voice, every story, every listener matters here. Thank you for walking this quiet path with me. The forest is vast, but kindness leaves trails that never disappear.